Throughout history, we've seen idols across the world, whether they be the types of idols that people are persecuted for believing, or the types of idols that one simply looks up to. And I really do believe that the state of Texas ought to view its own idol as Ann Richards. Ann Richards, who set most of the political background for the progressive society in Texas, has left a dramatic impact on our political and social sphere. And while she has done a lot to impact the political and social sphere, the things that she's done has ultimately blossomed into a greater and more powerful thing. So we can look at how Ann Richards' progressives impacts on society has blossomed first by what she said and what's happened afterwards with abortion in Texas. Then we can look at specifically gun rights and how they're being handled on a national level versus the state level, and then we can look to the overall social situation. And of course, with each of these, as you can tell, there are both the goods and the bads. And we'll be looking at this from Ann Richards' standpoint. So while some may believe that we ought to have whatever guns possible and pro-life may be right, it's ultimately going to say that Ann Richards doesn't think so. So we'll be looking at how she thinks about that. But Ann Richards' ideology has blossomed, and that's because progressive is forward and conservative is to hold on to the things that exist now. And the only change that we ever see generally is the progressive change. And in Texas, it's just that. And while Texas is known to be one of the most anti-abortion states, the most pro-life state, having a considerable restriction on abortion hospitals, abortion clinics, and Planned Parenthood clinics, specifically the restriction that a doctor who works at a Planned Parenthood clinic has to also work at a hospital within a very close proximity. Texas still has a considerable larger amount of Planned Parenthood clinics than they did back with Ann Richards, and that's because of the blossoming ideologies that she's placed in society. The considerable bloom across the world about these ideologies of pro-life and pro-choice has also been considerably grown by the fact that stem cell research, which has become a major impact both on the women's rights to choose and scientific ability to even heal individuals with their own stem cells and stem cells of aborted children. But we can also look to the safety of people who are already here with gun control rights. And while Ann Richards herself did own multiple hunting weapons, she did not own assault rifles, etc., and believed that those ought to be regulated. And while Texas is also known to have considerably less gun regulations than across the nation, with the recent passing of the open carry law, we've also seen some national regulation that has been inspired by Ann Richards and has been talked about. For example, we can see in the Democratic debates right now that Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are both talking about putting bans and regulations on gun shows and multiple other things, which were definitely inspired by Ann Richards. Ann Richards may seem to have a smaller impact when you put it on just in terms of right now, but looking back in comparison of what Texas was like during Ann Richards' times, more than 20 years ago, we've seen considerable change in safety and in regulations between then and now, both on the state level, local, and on the national level. But in addition, we can look at the overall impacts of what Ann Richards is doing for society, and that is the overall feeling of the government. Because before Ann Richards, there was a considerable amount of corrupt bureaucracy because most information was A, not technological, it was all on paper, and B, it wasn't checked by the citizens. However, Ann Richards came to power and ultimately put the political parties and the political individuals at the offices at the risk of the people. She made everybody who was in a Texas state office making the people rely on them and making them accountable to the people. An example of how this is happening right now is Rick Perry. And while he may appear to be a vigilante for the people in his actions, multiple or a couple of years ago, of how he used public funds in order to punish the DA who was driving drunk. This vigilantism is not accountable, and he was ultimately punished and indicted to the people. So we can also see that the removing of political red tape that Ann Richards had done has had a lasting impact on Texas politics. So in conclusion, we can see that Ann Richards has had a great impact on the progressiveness and working of government. And without her, Texas would be a much less socially capable and politically capable place.